Assalamu alaikum, girls. Hope you're all doing well today. We are continuing after our lesson of section 1.2 in chapter 1, where we discussed the main components of computer systems. And this lesson, we are going to cover section 1.3, which is on operating systems. As you know from before, operating system is one of the main system software in a computer. So let's see what we are going to cover in this lesson. The objectives from the syllabus that we need to cover under this section is how to define and describe operating systems which contain a CLI or command line interface. We will get more into this. Also, we will describe those operating systems which contain a GUI, which is the other type of operating system interface, and we will then describe the differences, including the benefits and the drawbacks between using operating systems which contain CLI and those which contain GUI. So, we are going to do some sort of a comparison and contrast. Your success criteria at the end of this lesson is that you must be able to list the differences between CLI and GUI, recognize the uses of an operating system, and identify which UI will be required in which scenario. And as an extension, you could explain the features of WIMP, which is WIMP, and post WIMP. As a starter for today's lesson, we have a small activity where these are some questions from the topic you've done earlier on main components of computer system. So let's try to go through at least a few questions for recap. The first question asks, what type of a device is a ROM chip? So you would remember that ROM, read-only memory, is standing for memory, so that is storage. Yes? So let's type in the correct answer and see if we are right. Good job. The next question is asking what type of a device is a DVD drive? Any DVD drive, USB, etc. can never be input or output. They are always storage devices. They store something. So again, D. Let's do a couple more. What type of device is a CPU? The CPU, remember, it stood for Central Processing Unit. This was not a storage device. We learned that CPU is the brain where all the sorting and calculations take place. So that's definitely not input or output. It must be processing. Let's try. Yes, we are right. One last question. Let's skip this one. The last question we will do today is asking what type of a device is a mouse. So mouse definitely comes under input and output, but which one? It takes data from the outside world to inside the computer, so that would be input. So let's type that in. Good. So that's our starter for today. Going back to our lesson, we are first going to discuss what really is an operating system. We learned before that it was a special software, it was a special system software, and it was to help us as users to communicate with the computer system. Now, a OS is so vast in its functionalities and what all things it does. So, the operating system really does so many things, such as controlling the operation of all the other devices, which is input, output, storage, and it supervises the loading, running, and storage of application programs. It deals with any errors that can occur in your system. It looks for what is the solution for that error, how can we get out of it. It helps to maintain security of your whole system. It always maintains a full computer log of what's happening in the system and so on. And also it eventually allows you to communicate between the user and the operating system. These are all examples of some operating systems you would have come across. For example, iOS, Mac OS, Windows, Android, and so on. So operating system is really the system software that manages all the general operation of your entire computer system. It is the one that provides security and prevents unauthorized system access. It loads all the application programs. So you can see this being a system software helps to load and run all the application software. It decides if there are many programs running which should have more priority to get the memory and so on. It helps you to save, organize, and find your files. And the part that we are discussing even more in depth today is this point. That is, the operating system helps the user interact with the computer through a user interface, UI. So these are all the tasks of the OS that we went through already. Now, when we talk about UI stands for user interface. This means it is used for the communication between the computer system and the user. So, what is there in between the user and the computer such that what you understand and you want the computer to do, the computer is able to comprehend and understand it. That is what a UI does. There are basically two types of UI, which is CLI and GUI. CLI stands for Command Line Interface and GUI stands for Graphical User Interface. Don't be scared by these long names. Once you see pictures related to this, you will be easily able to identify what is a CLI and what is a GUI. Look at these two pictures here. The guy on this left side is using a UI which looks like this. There is a black screen, there is some simple white writing on it. He has to type and give some commands to perform any action. The lady on the right here is going through a website called webpage.co.uk and she has some options here. She has some pictures, some icons, some menus, and so on. What you see on the left side is actually an example of CLI. CLI, Command Line Interface. What you see on the right side is an example of GUI, Graphical User Interface. So quickly, just by the picture, we are able to identify which is which. The CLI has a black screen and it will have white writing on it. You have to type out the commands. That's how you interact with the computer. The GUI is also used for the user to interact with the computer, but it has graphics, it has icons, it has menus, and you'll have a cursor or a pointer to help you navigate, right? Putting this knowledge together, we understand that command line interface will require users to type in their instructions to communicate with the computer system. If you have to type in instructions, what does it mean? That you as a user have to first of all learn these instructions. And this can sometimes be a slow process and require complex code to do even basic things. So for example, if you have a command line interface and you want to see what all files are there in your current folder, you will have to write a command to see those files and all those files will turn up one by one like this. If command line interface has all these issues, then why do we even have it? The advantage is that the user is able to have a direct communication with the computer system and he is not limited to a number of specified set options. So if you are an advanced user and you want to interact with the computer in a way that you want to not be held down by specified options, then you would be going for a CLI or a command line interface. It gives you direct communication with the computer and you are not limited to a set of options. But what are the difficulties? You will have to type in the instructions, learn the instructions, and sometimes you have to write complex instructions for even basic functions. Recapping what we've already said so far, CLI requires you to enter command prompts. It is normally used by expert users, advanced users. It is more complicated for them to use, and you are not restricted to a number of predetermined options. An example of a command is copy. Copy will copy one file from one location to another location. Whereas in a GUI, what would you normally do when you want to copy? You would just do right click and copy and paste somewhere, right? So this is the example we are going to study for understanding what is a GUI. The GUI is the other type of operating system interface which allows users to interact with the computer system using graphical icons or visual indicators. So this Windows that I'm using as my operating system is having a graphical user interface over here. Graphical user interface, the most common one is called WIMP, Windows, Icons, Menus and Pointing Device. You can see WIMP comes from these letters W, I, M and P. This was developed for mainly desktops and PCs. Now, like our example, you can see that anything in a graphical user interface is built around graphics, and you will be able to sort it into these four things: windows, icons, menus and pointers. What are windows? These are the areas where information is displayed. So for example, this is a window, this is a window and so on. What would a menu be? Menu are any list of options. So for example, the start menu is an example of a menu. What is an icon? Icon are the small images which represent some files, folders or applications. So for example, in your menu, in your window here, you have so many icons. These are all icons. And what is a pointer? The pointer is your mouse pointer, what you see on my screen that I'm moving around. A graphical user interface is quite easy to use because of its visual nature. So this is the advantage. And also we understand that the user has a lot of visual clues on what he has to do. These are all examples of graphical user interface. So you can see your iPhone screen, your Android screen, your Windows 10 start menu, your Mac OS screen. These are all examples of graphical user interface. Why? Because they all rely on graphics or visual graphics. Putting together all that we discussed so far, operating system interfaces are used for the user to interact with the computer system. They are divided into two: graphical user interface and command line interface. Both have advantages and disadvantages, and this is a very important slide for you to remember for your examination. This is an oft repeated question. The advantage of a GUI is that it is easy to use, you have a lot of visual clues, less chance of error, and it's quick to input commands. But the disadvantage is that all of these nice graphics will use a lot of computing power, and the user is restricted to predetermined options. The advantage of CLI, you will have direct communication with the computer and a wider range of commands to use. Disadvantage, you will have to remember complex commands, learn them, and a lot of typing might be required for quite simple tasks. So as I said, this slide is a very important slide. This is the same thing written in bullet points to make it easy for you. As a plenary for today's lesson, let's try to identify which type of operating system interface is used in each of the three computers shown here. So look at the first one. You can see here that the user has to type in the option that he needs. There is no visual clue or icons on what is to be done. So this is definitely a black screen with typing required for the command. So this becomes CLI. In the second laptop, there is some menus that you can already see here, and these menus are opening up new menus. You can clearly see a pointing device, and there are icons on what you have to do. So this is definitely GUI. In the third computer that you see here, there are nice icons visually telling you what it stands for. So this is definitely WIMP again, and that would be GUI. That's all for today, girls. Hope you had a good lesson and take care. Assalamu alaikum.